How's it going, Sige? It's really good to finally have you on. I think this thing has been scheduled, rescheduled like so many times. It's definitely mostly my fault, so I apologize for that for sure.
No problem. No, I think I might have canceled a few myself as well. So all good.
So, Sige, I always start people off with having you tell their background, right, of how you got into IT, how you got into security, what kind of made you go down this path. And the reason why I do that is because there's a lot of people that listen to my podcast that are looking to get into security, that are looking to get into IT, and they don't know if it's possible for them, if it's right for them. So I feel like hearing a different background, which, I've done over 100 episodes. I've never heard the same background. But hearing that different background, lets my audience know that they have a chance at actually making this work for them.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think it is interesting to hear these different stories, especially the non-conventional ones, and they come up much more than I guess people would expect. Mine is no different. I started just tinkering with computers when I was a teenager, and I don't know what it was. I always sort of enjoyed building things with my hands. Legos, building projects, whatever. Just sort of the high of sort of creating something from nothing was interesting, and then got into, probably was video games that got me into computers. But one of the things that was interesting was, my first I had some older machines, but when I was like 13, 14, I actually got like an Intel based PC, and it actually had a pretty good warranty from the manufacturer, which was Compaq. And as I would go about my business playing different games, you'd run into sort of issues with slowness, and okay, you got to upgrade my memory, you got to upgrade this, and tried to do it myself. And I burned out the motherboard a few times, or broke this or broke that. And I was lucky that the thing had a great warranty, and every time that would happen, they'd send me like a replacement or a new part, and it was great because it afforded me the ability to kind of learn based on my mistakes, and teach myself how to fix these things or how they work. And that's the way that I learn. Kind of need to get my hands on it and just sort of get into it instead of just being sort of dictated. That's how I got into it, and then just sort of go down the rabbit hole. Enjoyed started getting into programming, started getting into chat rooms with different people. Heard about this thing called Linux, installed it, on based on 40 floppy disks or whatever. And at that point, it was just cool making things work. And there was no Google then, and there was not even any classes about this stuff. It was all very bleeding edge, and so I think one of the big takeaways was you had to figure things out on your own. And if it meant sifting through source code and making some changes and recompiling, that was all you really had. And eventually I went to college for computer science, but I got a job at a local ISP running their BSD and Linux servers. And that was like the late 90s. And that's when websites started getting popular. And so I was mostly running just hosting websites on Apache and so on. And then I met another person working there who would become my business partner. He quit and said he wanted to start his own hosting company. And eventually he convinced me to go join him. And then kind of rest was history. We're at the right place, right time, but no rule book, learning as you go, say yes to everything, figure out how to get it done after, and just a lot of battle scars.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you put it, say yes to everything and then figure it out later. It's, I can't remember where I heard that from. But that really put kind of like everything into perspective for me, you're not going to know everything right off the bat, but you saying yes opens you up to getting that experience for you to learn it. So then, you'll know it forever then at that point. Is that kind of your mentality too with it? Was it scary for you at first, just jumping into things and not, knowing it? Was it exciting? What was your mentality with it?
It was exciting. I mean, I would say it's a little scary. I mean, I think it's exciting because it's a little scary, right? And for us, we started off by hosting our friends' websites, and we were at, right place, right time. Not many sort of options on the internet, and we were like one of the first ones. And so we had a lot of random customers that would come in, and they all had different requirements, different industries, different applications, different use cases. And what's great about that is they're all coming at you with different problems to be solved. And so you don't really have to think much. Either you can solve the problem or their business is going to go elsewhere. And, so I remember, we were hosting all small websites, and one of our customers, they grew and grew, and they outgrew a server. And, we had to get a load balancer, which was a big deal back then. And, never, that was exciting. I never installed one before, and I was up all night, whatever, in data center a few days and got it working. And so it's funny, as his business scaled and grew, so did we. And I remember afterwards he said, he's like, I don't know if you've ever done one of those before, but either way, like, good job. Like, he kind of knew, but like, I don't think he cared because he was kind of in the same boat. I think that's so, like, if you have customers or you have people that are asking you to do things, what's great is they're not asking you or not telling you to go and learn a certain technology. They're giving you a goal, something to achieve. And you just have to figure out what that looks like along the way and what you need to learn and what you need to figure out. And I think that's the right way to do it. I think today there's a lot of people that are trying to get into these technologies. And in our industry, there's way too much sort of shiny object syndrome. Everyone's hyper focused on, the newest coding language, and it's all about sort of stacking your resume and listing out all the technologies. So there's kind of like this undertone of pressure to have to learn all these technologies. I think that if people like are presented with a goal, go and build an application that does X, Y, or Z, or feeds your dog automatically, whatever, you're going to be forced to find the right tools and languages and platforms to get it done. And that's how you'll learn them, right? Anytime you kind of sit down and you say, all right, I'm going to teach myself X today, it's like, it's no fun,
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was talking to someone, this was a few years ago at this point, where he had just gotten out of college and he was trying to get a job as a developer, and he couldn't get a job as a developer. He got his bachelor's in computer science and whatnot. And he knew the different, languages that he had to learn, that he needed to know for these jobs that he was applying for, and he didn't really get it. And I recommended to him that he actually do his own projects, right? Like, he started just thinking of different applications, different things that he would find useful and maybe someone else would as well, and start posting them on GitHub, and start kind of just learning it from that angle, because I think people forget that just because you got a degree doesn't mean that, you have demonstratable knowledge. It doesn't mean that you can put all that together into an application and build a whole stack around it, right, and have it all talk to each other and actually provide a service. And, I thought that he was actually going to do it, but lo and behold, he didn't actually do it, and he's still not even in IT. He's like working at a baker shop or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But when you tell me that your goal is to get into IT, to be a developer for a company, and then, 4 or 5 years later, you're still in the same spot, it's like, all right, well, what'd you do? Like, obviously nothing, or not the right things,
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's, a good way to kind of get exposed to it is go on a freelancer or another one of these consulting websites, and do people's projects for free, or super low cost, because they're challenging you, they're putting a goal in front of you, and it's going to force you into learning something. And when I've interviewed people over the years, yes, I look at the education, but I'm way more interested in what have you done? Tell me the coolest thing that you've built, flex your geek muscle and tell me how low level you've gotten, or what you're most proud of. Maybe it's a project, or maybe just some crazy issue that you had to troubleshoot that sticks out. But, show me how deep you can get into the weeds. And there are, ways to do that. Like I said, go do a free project, back when I went to school too, I kind of agree with you. I think there's much more specialized education these days, but I think up until recently, the education that you would get was sort of like a taste of all these different either coding languages or aspects of IT, and they kind of don't tell you. It's like, hey, we're going to give you a class introducing you to like all these different sort of layers. But you should probably go home and like dive deep into one, because who wants to hire a generalist at a college?
Right.
You need to take that, and we're giving you a sample. You figure out what you like, what you gravitate towards. And if you really like it, you're probably going to end up spending some of your free time doing it and build some projects. And then when you go in for resume, I think, for an interview, then you're really sort of marketable.
Yeah. I found when I was trying to get into security myself, that was one of the biggest hurdles, or even one of the biggest questions that was asked to me, the most even, was, what do you do in your free time? Like that's great that you know all this information and whatnot, but what do you do with it in your free time? Are you a 9 to 5 security person, or are you, a 24/7 security person that is going to be researching, different vulnerabilities and 0 days and whatnot, like in your off time, and I always felt that was one of the things that kind of, I guess, separated me from the pack. That I didn't think of it at the time like that, but later on, talking to my hiring managers, they definitely took it like that. Like even this podcast, it's like it's an example of, me trying to not only meet new people, learn new things, but also help the security community in a way that I wasn't doing it before. It's better when you do the extra work, when you do that little bit extra, because that's what's going to separate you apart from everyone else, at least in my opinion. And, sounds like you agree as well. That's what you're looking for as an employer. You're looking for the people that, actually love what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. What that reminds me of is, over the years, I would have techs working for me, and they would be dealing with customer issues. And, oftentimes they would troubleshoot something or try to fix it. And at some point they'd sort of reach that threshold and kind of give it to me and say, hey, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. I can't get this working. And it's all right. Send me the information. And now it was on my plate. And either I figured it out, or we lost the customer, or they went elsewhere. And, that's really good motivation. And sometimes it's not convenient. I remember, weekends of just, Windows blue screen of death, and like either I figure this out or we're losing revenue. And so it was great for me because it taught me some really good troubleshooting skills, which is, I think, a skill that people don't focus enough on. But also it was good for me. It was good for the customer in most cases, but it was not good for the tech that kind of let it go, because they're losing an opportunity. They're missing an opportunity. And, one of the things that I think, people need to realize is, to what extent is your work environment a playground, for you to experiment and learn and teach yourself new things. Like if your boss is giving you, leeway or more time to troubleshoot or work on something and figure it out, and they're okay with that, then you should not be giving up or throwing up your hands. That's a gift. And so when people have worked for us over the years, it took me a long time to kind of realize that that's an asset. We're working with us in similar environments. We're hosting different workloads for customers in different verticals and industries, and they're using different IT stacks and applications. That's a playground. You're getting exposed to all these different things. You're not pigeonholed. You're maybe you're solving the same challenges often, but there's the same challenges in different environments. So it's always different. And in fact, I've had a lot of people that quit and went to work elsewhere, big name companies, and then they come back like, hey, do you have any side projects for me? I'm kind of like getting bored. So I think people need to look at that too. Like, okay, look at the comp, look at your salary and all that. But to what extent do I have an opportunity to learn here?
Yeah, that's a huge part of it as well, especially when you're starting out. Like that, it's more critical for you to learn than it is for you to make more money. And, earlier on in my career, I was working for a company that, created enhanced 911 software, right? That provided some enhanced location data with it. And one of the rules that we had as an application specialist, just help desk, one of the rules was if we encountered something that we didn't know, you had a certain amount of time to troubleshoot it on your own. At that point, if you go over that point, you have to escalate it. And then when you escalate it, you're not allowed to hand it off and just walk away. You're still on that call. You are still learning. You're taking notes. And then you're taking those notes after the call and you're going back to the engineer that helped you and you're going through them to make sure that you're learning, that you're not encountering the same problem, 2, 3, 4 times and not understanding the issue and whatnot. Right. And they had this rule in place and they said like, if you ever break it, like that's just automatic termination. Like we're not going to put up with that. We'll put up with you being dumb, but you need to be willing to learn, and that was just like a rule or a mentality from the VP really. And there was only one time, this only happened one time where the new guy decided to like leave the call and figured that he was completely done, that his job was over. And by the end of the day, I mean, he was gone. It was like no one tested him before that, no one tested that rule before that. Right. And I don't think anyone took it that serious, but everyone knew that it was a rule and we all wanted to learn. And so it's like, yeah, we're going to do this regardless. It's not even a question of if we're going to do it. It's like, give me a minute, I'm going to go get some water and I'll be right back, But once that happened, it kind of like changed the whole tone. It's like, no, this role is truly designed for you to learn, this Linux application better than anyone else in the world. And that's why you're allowed to go on site at customers. It's because the code that's going on underneath and you have this low level title. And I didn't, looking back on it, I can put all those pieces together. But when you're in it, it's an interesting, different experience, I guess.
Yeah, and when you're into it, you don't even realize that it's you're learning, right? I mean, it's like the best. I think the best times I learned. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was in high school, maybe senior year, there was electives, and I didn't want to do any of the electives. I was into my computers, I was into Linux, all this stuff, and so I proposed to the school that they let me do my own elective, and I would build a website and a mail server and shared services for all the students, blah blah blah, and I gave them a whole list, and then they agreed to it, and I got all that stuff done in like a few days. And then for the rest of the year, I had like 45 minutes or an hour to do whatever I wanted on the computer. And, I thought I really got one over on the school, because I got it all done quickly and then I had my own time. Not years later, I realized that actually what I was doing with that time, to me, it was fun. It was my time. But what was I doing? I was coding. I was coding programs. I was learning, how to code. I was in IRC talking to people. We were trying to upgrade, our kernels and do all these different things. To me, that was fun. But in reality, the school really facilitated, me learning. And so, did I get over on them or did they get over on me? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting situation. So, to kind of shift gears and talk about what you're doing now, I guess, are you still at that same company? Is Opt9 the same company that, you got into with your friend and you did all this kind of interesting work, or where did Opt9 come into play?
Sure. Yeah. So the company that we started was called WebAir, and it was in the late 90s. And we kind of rode that wave and grew with the industry as there was needs for web hosting. And then we just sort of kept adapting to our customers' needs. Eventually, almost 20 years later, we ran it. We had, 50, 60, 70 people. And we really had to focus on hosting enterprise workloads, virtual private clouds, hosted private clouds globally, kind of transitioned away from web hosting. Web hosting was good to kind of really, get your feet wet, dealing with tons of, 0-day SSH vulnerabilities and having hundreds of thousands of IPs on the public internet getting scanned constantly and, all sorts of fun DDoS attacks. Web hosting is fun. We could talk about WordPress probably for days. But then we transitioned more to enterprise customers where compliance and security were more important and customizing the infrastructure to fit within their framework for security and networking. And so that's where we kind of landed at the end, mostly hybrid cloud deployments, a ton of offsite backups and disaster recovery. And ultimately, we sold the business 2.5 years ago to a private equity firm. And my partner, he exited. I've stuck around just because I'm a geek and we're just still building cool stuff. And we ended up merging with two other companies, one with a focus on AWS and one with a big presence in Canada. And we renamed to Opti9. And today we're really still focused, offsite backups and disaster recovery is a huge focus for us, as well as managed public and private clouds. So it's funny, like every time I think like we've kind of done everything or there's no more runway, the technology is evolving, the third-party technologies, what our customers are trying to implement for their own needs. And so we have to keep up. And as, there's new clouds that pop up and new SaaS platforms, everything's getting more complex, right? And so people have more of a need to outsource to managed service providers like us to take ownership for those things.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think is coming on the horizon in terms of tech that you're going to have to be tackling to provide for your customers? I guess the first thing that would come to mind is some sort of AI integration with their own, workloads and processes and whatnot, something like ChatGPT, but, it might even branch off into like a more customizable solution, right, for each business. Is that a route that you see the marketplace going down that you're going to have to expand into and kind of learn and grow in, or is it somewhere else?
That's definitely part of it. If we've used some of that new technology for some of our offerings, and I'll give you an example. Being a provider that sells offsite backups and disaster recovery for our customers, we definitely noticed an uptick in that over the last 2 or 3 years. And, some of it's sort of awareness and having to check the right boxes for auditors, for compliance officers. But a lot of it, I think, is just sort of the awareness and ransomware attacks and security. And people obviously want to mitigate that. And so we realized if that's one of the reasons why they're consuming our, let's say, disaster recovery as a service, how can we help them? How can we better address, their needs? And so we're kind of thinking about that. At the same time, we were noticing some of our customers actually getting ransomware. And prior to the ransomware attack taking place, we noticed the attackers, once they would get into an environment, they would be seeking out backup and replication tools and software so that they can destroy any possibility for recovery and then increase their chances of being paid the ransom. And it was interesting because it's sort of like a new attack, like the backup software itself, the DR replication software itself is like kind of this new attack surface that is under the microscope of these attackers. And it never was before. Like the attackers are getting trained on the software. They know how to log in and change retention settings and disable backups and all. And so we realized that we actually had a very unique vantage point where, because of the service we're providing, we're actually pulling a lot of metadata about the state of their backup configuration and the replication. And so we actually built a service called Observer, where we're taking all of that and we're running it through machine learning to provide anomaly detection. Where if if you're not changing encryption settings normally, or modifying your jobs, or removing VMs from backup configurations, changing retentions, and all of a sudden we see, activity like that, we can send you a threat notification that there's an anomaly and we see suspicious activity. And so we built that, and I think it's interesting because that is a layer of the stack that no other security tools are really looking at. And if you can detect an attacker making those changes, you can almost predict and potentially mitigate an attack before it starts. And so we built that. We built Observer. We did some cool stuff with it. We have it set up now to integrate into third-party SIM and XDR tools. We have it set up so that if it detects a large enough or suspicious enough threat, that it'll automatically air gap the customer's offsite disaster recovery environment and offsite backups, which is pretty neat. So I thought that was a really good example of sort of because you hear about machine learning. For me, all these years, it's very hard to discern what is shiny object, what is just sounds cool, to what can I actually use for what I'm trying to accomplish for my job. And we didn't force that down anyone's throat. It just naturally came up. But hey, here's a really good way to utilize ML for this goal.
Huh. That's really interesting. So your solution is able to air gap their environment from their backup solutions. Can you talk a little bit about potentially, how that is accomplished or anything around that? Because I find that to be really interesting. That's a really innovative solution that, obviously I've never heard of that before, coming from really any other company that deals in the space of security or ransomware or anything like that. Even to go down that thought path of, hey, there's an anomaly, we're automatically going to shield you from it in the event that this is real. Even just having, I guess, that initial idea is almost a stretch. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of like a stretch to even go down that route mentally when solving this problem, right? So how did you guys go down this route, and how did you kind of stumble upon this?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the first part of our conversation, where it was based out of a need. We started noticing this with our customers, and we had customers that had all their backups deleted and were ransomwared, and then they would call us and say, "Do you happen to have another copy on your side? Like, we're totally screwed." And luckily, part of our service is whenever backups are deleted from our side, from the cloud, it does go into an air gap recycle bin for a little bit of time. And so, we just started seeing it, and we realized that because the backup infrastructure, backup software, replication software is under that radar, that lens of the attackers, it's like, this is a problem. So the way that we're doing it is, and this kind of is a larger conversation, but a lot of people out there have a false sense of security when it comes to all of these things, right? And I'm sure you know this, right? They're like, "Oh, I have an MSSP, so I'm secure," or "I have an EDR, I'm secure." Same thing. I have backups. I have a disaster recovery strategy, so I'm secure. With disaster recovery in specific and replication tools, if an attacker gets into that tool at the production site, at the source site, by virtue of how that software works, if they're in that software, they can now control. That software is writing to the target on the other side, so they can just say delete everything. Like, an attacker can destroy your DR capability in sight in seconds. Now, when people think about this, a lot of times they start talking about, well, what about immutability? Immutable data, immutable backups. And it's true, there is immutability, but that's with backups. It does not work with replication. So if you look at replication tools like your Zertos or your Veeams, or your Commvaults, they don't support that from a disaster recovery perspective. And so that's one, right? And even with backups, right? You hear these statistics about attackers being inside an environment for 60 days, 90 days before they do anything or before people notice. And so same thing here. They can get into your backup tool. I've seen them detect immutability and just turn off your jobs and wait it out. Remove some servers from your backups and just wait for that immutability timer to run out, and then ransomware you. So the way that we deal with the air gap is very simple. We just change the credentials for the access for your offsite backup or replicas from the data mover, from the on-prem or on the production data mover that's sending the data, because that's where the attacker has access to. And so if the tool can no longer impose any changes on the other side, it's air gapped. They would have to call us in order to revert that.
Huh. And if you had a guess, how many customers have benefited from this technology?
I would say many, and sometimes it's not just attackers, but this also plays into, rogue employees. Sometimes when we show the interface to potential customers and we show them all the factors that we're monitoring, everything that's going into the anomaly detection, they might look at that and be like, wow, it's really cool that you're looking at encryption settings being modified for your threat detection or retention settings being modified. But, I'm the only person at my company that's supposed to be changing those things. If there's a change to encryption, I want to know about that right away. Please notify me right away. I think the other interesting thing about this is that many of the tools out there, like the backup software tools, they can send out alerts. They can send you a notification when your backups don't run successfully or when your RTOs are not being met. But as a general rule of thumb, you probably don't want to use a tool to tell you when that tool itself is broken, right? or from a security perspective, an attacker disables the tool, disables the server, shuts down the server, disables your SMTP service, whatever. Now you're not getting those alerts. And so what we built is interesting because it's on the outside looking in. We're pulling that metadata. We're keeping it in our cloud. And even if your entire environment gets destroyed, we still have all that data and that logs. And so it's interesting to think about an SLA-backed service, which is beholden to notify you when X, Y, and Z happens, from software that you buy that has a capability to do something that you are responsible for maintaining, right? And so I think it's interesting. And I do think that concept long-term, we're going to see it in other places.
Huh. Yeah, it's a different way of tackling this problem and even providing services. It's like a different level of service almost, like I know there's a lot of vendors out there that kind of rely on their customers to tell them when something has gone wrong. Well, in that scenario, like the customer is already frustrated more than likely, right? And working on help desk, it's always a tense situation when you pick up the phone and you're already getting yelled at and it's 8 a.m. It's like, I didn't even get through my first cup of coffee. Like, can we slow down here a minute? So it's refreshing to kind of hear a company actually think about this a different way. And you mentioned something before with, customers kind of thinking that they're automatically secure because they have an MSSP or some other, managed service provider. And I always have trouble with that, right? As a security professional, but just out of almost common sense, right? Like it's an added layer of protection and nothing more. It's not the end all be all in your environment. I worked for a company that didn't want to invest heavily into security. And so they got an MSP. Well, with that MSP, we completely relied on them to tell us if there was malware in the environment, if there was anything weird going on in the environment. And if there was no alerts coming in, the so-called security team basically had nothing to act on. And, for a while, there was no alerts coming in. And I just talked to the person who bought the solution. I'm like, we're paying them all this money and they're not giving us any intelligence in our environment. Like they're giving us nothing, right? Like there is stuff going on in this environment. I know that you think or that you want to think that there's no malware here, but it's a computer network. Like there's going to be malware, you know, like we should be knowing about it. And it's difficult even today, which is weird to say. It's difficult even today to kind of break people away from that older mentality of I'm going to buy this solution and it's going to solve everything. Are you finding that to be a potential situation that that you're having to discuss with your customers as well?
Yeah, all the time. And I think in some ways it gets better over time. In some ways it gets worse. There are just so many horrible assumptions out there. A good example is people move their email to, let's say, Microsoft 365. And now, my email's in the cloud. I don't have to worry about X, Y, and Z. And people are shocked when I tell them that there's no backups of their emails in Microsoft 365, and they have to go and consume that separately. That's a service that we sell, so it's near and dear our heart. But people just assume, I'm in the cloud, I'm secure, I'm safe. They must have 10 data centers, and obviously, I'm sure you're very familiar with the kind of shared responsibility model. So that's a big part. That there's just so many bad assumptions. I think part of it is the vendors. Companies like us, the word cloud is just so vague. The word managed services is so vague. They allow the vendors to redefine them to, based upon what they want to sell and how. And so you really got to read between the lines. People ask us the wrong questions all the time. Instead of, they ask us, do you have a SOC 2 type 2 audit, instead of, did your audit yield any, exceptions or problems? The other thing too, I think that people don't realize is complexity. To the extent that, your organization is going online and consuming SaaS products and clouds and different software, one of the primary goals of IT leaders today should be managing complexity and preventing kind of complexity, creep. To the extent you're focused on simplifying your IT stack is to the extent that you can manage it and monitor it and secure it and scale it, right? And you got to manage that complexity. Some people just don't get that,
Yeah, that's very, it's very interesting, right? As a cloud security professional, when people still have these misconceptions about the cloud, they just assume going into the cloud, whatever it is, will be secure, and they won't have to worry about it. The best one is with backups too, right? Like they always assume, oh, the cloud is doing the backups automatically, or, our S3 bucket is replicating, we click this checkbox and it should be replicating, right? All these different things. And it's frustrating, it's challenging, but I mean, I guess it shows that, people like you and I will always be in business, right? Like,
Yeah.
because there's so many nuances, not to bash different people that don't understand this stuff as well as we do. There's so many nuances to this thing. I mean, you can spend your whole career in AWS and not know everything about AWS. Same thing with Azure and every other cloud provider, or even technology, right? It's just interesting how we develop these mentalities and then we kind of just stay within them, over time, no matter what, almost.
Yeah, I agree. Years ago, or maybe when I was a teenager, people would say, "Oh, you're the computer guy," or "I heard you're real good with computers," or whatever. It's like, if you were to say that to someone now, it's like a joke. It's like, well, what aspect? It's like you said, what aspect? Is it AWS? Well, which aspect of it? It's so sort of localized now. And the same thing, like if our environments are getting more complex, if it's a mix of AWS and Azure, and these different SaaS platforms and all that, and IT teams need to manage that and secure that and monitor that, it's nearly impossible. And so I think it makes a big case for outsourcing to best in breed that can own specific layers. And actually, that's what we do, right? And so we're doing fully managed backups in DR, which is kind of like low hanging fruit, right? Because it's not your production environment. It's responsive to your production environment. You don't have to make any changes for it to be responsive. And so, certainly for us, I think it's it's a growing market. But people need to like think about these things before they go out and start consuming a SaaS product. Like, will this fit into my resilience profile or my compliance profile? Like, you have to think about those things before you agree to buy something, not afterwards, years or months later when it's being used.
Yeah, absolutely. So, before we close here, if you had to give one piece of advice to someone that's trying to get into security, right, but they want to kind of future-proof their career to some extent, they always want to have a skill set that is in demand, that's able to, get a job regardless of the economy and whatnot. What skill set would you tell them to really master and go into?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I actually think it's very difficult to be an expert in security, like in IT security, without really knowing, like, the underpinnings and sort of the, what the architecture and what it's all living. Like, if you think of, if you talked about like what makes a really good, hacker or an attacker, right? There are probably folks that know how to code. They're coding. They know how to code to an extent. They know their way around, Linux or Unix style operating system. They know their way around networking. Like, you need all of those things to make a good attacker. You really need all those things to make a good security consultant, right? Like, it's very difficult. Like, it's very difficult to say that you're good in security if you don't know, how TCP/IP works and how to do, packet sniffing and, understand, the basics around Linux. And so, as hard as it is to learn all of those things, I do think that folks need a really good foundation with how the internet works. And you definitely need some programming logic. You need to at least, you got to learn Python or whatever. I don't care what language you learn, as long as you learn a programming language, because you just have to know the basic logic functions that exist in all of them. And so, like, that in itself, I think, is important. Networking in itself is important. The more low level you get with systems and or clouds, it will make you a better, security expert. So I definitely think there's a place for that. I also think there's a place for the non-technical skills, and this is an area that is always glossed over. The shiny objects. And again, like, same thing with networking skills and basic coding logic and systems. That doesn't go away. That transcends the Kool-Aid of the day or the language of the day. Same thing with non-technical skills. Being a really good troubleshooter. To the extent that you're a good troubleshooter, the language may change, the environment may change, but your ability to localize a problem, reproduce a problem, filter out the noise or the symptom from the root cause, those don't go away. So try to find skills that transcend, like I said, sort of what's trendy right now. Look at troubleshooting as a skill that needs to be developed and learned. Technical writing, being good at writing technical documentation. I mean, it's not just an afterthought that you do when you want to be done with a project. Like, you need to take pride. If someone else is manning, the battle station at 4 a.m. and they read your document, can they figure it out without calling you? Like, there's these soft skills that will get you just as far as being able to fill your resume with 40 different odd languages or open source tools.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, technical underwriting or technical writing is underrated, in my opinion. I learned this earlier on in my career where, everyone on the help desk would have their own kind of upgrade guides, right? Based on what they encountered, the different steps that they would have to do and all that sort of stuff. But mine was by far the most comprehensive because I would run into all of these random issues, right? Things that even the developers didn't even understand how to troubleshoot, didn't expect would happen, all of that stuff. And so, like, everyone would wait for my guide to just come out, when a new release would happen, because it's like, all right, if there's a problem, Joe's going to find it. And if Joe finds it, he's going to document it to the most extent that you possibly could. I'd have screenshots. I mean, truly, I wanted it to be someone I wanted to be where someone just coming off the street, right? Day one employee, everyone's on the phone, and this guy has to pick up the phone and, troubleshoot this problem or work through this upgrade, right? I wanted them to be able to refer to my guide and have all the answers right there. And maybe they, ask me a question here and there, something like that. But being able to have that in-depth detail is extremely important. That I think a lot of people, including myself, even forget that that's a side of IT.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people. That's the boring stuff. The monitoring, the documentation, the testing, the training, that's the stuff that gets glossed over. But, it's really kind of make or break for many of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience where they can reach out to you if they wanted to, where they can find your company, and maybe if you're going to be at any of the conferences this year.
Well, hit me up on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to find me. I have kind of a unique name, so there's not too many of me out there. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Conference-wise, I will be at VeeamON in 2 weeks, which is a conference specific to Veeam, which is backup software. And I mentioned the tool that we built for security. It's sort of works with that. Beyond that, I'm not sure. I kind of it's all last minute, to be honest. But hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat with anyone about any of these things offline or in the future.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thanks for coming on. I really do appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation, and I'll definitely have to have you back on in the future.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.